Hey, what's up, everybody? We have got the Bad Batch's latest episode. That is episode number 13. We're going to review it. It's called Infested, and it's happening right now.
You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel, and as you can see, Darryl's not joining me yet. He's had a little bit of technical issues. Hopefully, he gets through them pretty soon, but you know what? I'm here. It's been a crazy day for us today. I had some family emergencies, and Dad's in the hospital. I had to take care of that. Now he's having technical issues. But you know what? I figure nothing's going to stop us from bringing this review of the Bad Batch to you guys. So, this has been actually kind of an interesting episode. I thought that this episode of the Bad Batch was a little bit different, in my opinion, than some of the other episodes were. Up until now, you basically had two different types of episodes. You had one type where maybe there was a lot of action, and all of them, mind you, focused on character development, but there was always either a focus more on the action or a focus more on the characters, which I actually thought was kind of a cool thing, because a lot of times in the other series, I don't think they actually delve too much into the characters as much as they have in this series. I think even more so than the Clone Wars, I think the Bad Batch has been a lot more successful in dealing with the actual character development. But then also, something else I wanted to point out is that we had a little bit more of the world building. And this is another thing that I think is unique to this particular series, is that you had quite a bit more world building in this. And it just, I don't know, I just think that, I can't help but think that maybe that's been the key to the success of this series so far. Is that, it basically is concentrating a lot on the world around it, more so than just the latest mission of the week. Not that that's a criticism, but I think that one thing that the Bad Batch does better than some of the other series is that it does actually give us a little bit more of a sense of what's going on around the galaxy. And I think, honestly, that's important for this series, because this is taking place during a time period that we hadn't been exposed to yet. And so I think that that's actually one of the great things about it. So the episode is called Infested. And pretty much, when Darryl's with me, we usually kind of break this thing down and go through every little scene and stuff like that. And that's great. And of course, when he and I are doing this together, I think that that's a really great way of doing it, because we talk about the scenes and we break it down. But being that I'm pretty much doing this on my own, and honestly, I didn't expect to have to do it on my own, because he is only now having some technical issues, then I'm going to handle it a little bit differently. And that is, I want to talk about it a little bit more overall. I thought that there was some really great scenes in this thing. It basically comes down to the Bad Batch goes back to Sid's, and they find out that, first of all, it's a little bit more crowded than it usually is. There's a lot more people. And what I found funny about that is that's exactly one of the things that I had always said. I always said that you always go to Sid's place and there's hardly anybody in there. So how does she stay in business? I mean, we would joke about that all the time. But this time, they actually talked about that in universe. They talked about how, hey, this place is a little bit more crowded than usual. And so, consequently, they realized that it was actually taken over by somebody else. And it's another gangster and everything else. And they realized that Sid's been pushed out. And so, consequently, their first reaction is, all right, we got to get rid of this guy. And so, of course, they meet up with Sid, and then eventually she pretty much hatches a little bit of a plan to to get the bar back from this guy. And the gangster actually, I wish I can remember his name. He basically got a bunch of, he was going to get some spice for the Pike. Now, if you guys remember the Pike, that was a group that they did bring up in season 7 of the Clone Wars. Can't recall offhand if they were I think they were pretty much in the main series of the Clone Wars as well, but they really focused on them in season 7. And I always thought that these guys were somewhat of a really huge threat. They're actually one of the more sinister enemies, I think, or villains in the Star Wars universe, more so than what we had seen in a long time. So I really appreciated the fact that they keep bringing these guys back because, again, I don't necessarily think that you can overuse them because they're just a really interesting group of characters. And in between episode 3 and 4, that would be the time where these guys would actually show up. So I was really happy to see that. So they come up with this plan, and at first, the Bad Batch is a little hesitant to help Sid in this one. To which Omega is kind of like, hey, look, you guys, you gotta help. I mean, she would pretty much do the same for us and all this other stuff. And that's another thing that I really appreciate about this whole series is the fact that the Bad Batch is not just one of these typical enemies that are just, they're going to basically save the day all the time, right? They're not your traditional heroes, which I really love about those guys because they're a little bit more realistic. You have to remember that these guys have to pretty much hide out. They're wanted by the Empire. They got bounty hunters after them. Omega herself is a target. So there's all kinds of things going on that these guys can't just stick their necks out all the time and make their presence known. Excuse me. So pretty much Omega convinces them to, of course, help. And so they get this plan. They're just going to go in this little underground passage or whatever that leads up into the back of Sid's office, and they're just going to take the spice and they're going to bring it down. Well, what I think is really cool was as they're going in these little carts or whatever, Sid's basically telling them, like, okay, you got to be quiet, right? And so naturally, the first thing that you're thinking of is, okay, why do they have to be quiet? And of course, the episode is called Infested, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of, well, okay, they're going to probably run into somebody. But one of the first things I thought of, I don't know about you guys, but one of the first things I thought of was the movie Pitch Black. That's sort of the vibe that it gave me when they were going over this thing, because once again, and this seems to be something that they always deal with in these things, they always talk about how these different creatures are night sensitive, right? You saw that in Pitch Black. There's been a bunch of other movies where they basically had the same thing, to where you get these almost subterranean creatures and they're pretty much, their weakness is light. So it was actually kind of cool because, they're going through, and of course, Wrecker drops his flashlight. But much to my surprise, when that happened, they didn't immediately wake up. And that's what I thought was actually going to happen. I thought as soon as the flashlight was bouncing down and they're kind of bracing themselves, I'm like, okay, they're going to end up waking up. But that didn't happen. And that was one of the things that really made me happy about this whole thing, was the fact that, once again, the series does a really good job, in my opinion, of not going for the cliche type of a storytelling way of doing things. They don't go for what you would expect. They don't go for the obvious. They always throw you a little bit of a curveball. Now, there are other ways where you could argue that they maybe go through the more familiar storytelling path, but in this case, they didn't. So they pretty much get the spice, but naturally, the first thing that they did was they had the Ithorian, who is basically if you guys don't know, they're the hammerhead-looking creatures. And in fact, in in the original Star Wars series, right, they basically had the little action figure called Hammerhead because he was the only one in the cantina that was like it. An action figure I had, and yes, I did used to play with that thing. I would always make him a part of the adventures because he was just so weird looking. But in Sid's bar, there's him and the other guy. And so they decide to steal the gangster's pet as somewhat of a diversion. And of course, they mess it up. So of course, he gets back just in time to see them taking the last of the spice. And that was the only thing that I thought was maybe a little bit on the nose. Because that's, yet again, an expected thing. Now, granted, I understand why they did it, because it is one of the only ways that you can really move this type of a story forward. And let's keep in mind, this is like a 30-minute show, basically. So it's not like they can get too into it. But it was predictable, in my opinion. I thought that they maybe could have done something a little bit different. But again, in a way, we were rewarded by the fact that when they were first going through this tunnel and Wrecker dropped a flashlight, he didn't immediately wake the creatures, such as they were. But I think one of the reasons why they did it that way, though, was because they wanted to build up some of the suspense, right? Because you could tell that Sid was just like, oh, if you make any kind of a sound, we're dead. And she's not really too scared of a whole lot of different things. But in this case, she was kind of freaking out. And nothing happened. And I think that what they were trying to do was build that tension. Not necessarily release or reveal the creatures right away, but kind of make you as the viewer wonder, well, what's down there? Because I know that's what I was thinking. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but that actually was a little bit more chilling. Because there's a lot of crazy things in the Star Wars universe that, quite frankly, if I ever saw some of this stuff face to face, it would freak me out. I mean, how many of these things... I always used to say that, too. I would joke about that with Star Trek. You're flying through space, right? You're an explorer. You're kind of... I mean, just once, I would love for one of these alien creatures to pop up on the view screen and have everybody just freak out, in terror. Like, whoa, what's that? But, of course, pretty much you're meant to... this stuff is commonplace. But they didn't know what these things were. So it wasn't until... they're coming back with the spice that once again, you got some of these gangster guys and his henchmen are starting to shoot at him and everything. And that eventually wakes up this whole swarm of these flying creatures that once again, really were reminiscent to me of what you saw in the movie Pitch Black. Now, you can also compare them a little, maybe somewhat to the Geonosians. Just in the, a little bit in the design, but again, it wasn't necessarily derivative, but I didn't really find it highly original either. On the other hand, it's kind of like, how many of these creatures could you possibly have, right? So I do understand that. I mean, I do get that, but at the same time, I just think that they could have done a little bit better job in that sense. But again, it's nitpicking, guys. I understand that. I'm not really faulting them. I'm not really, I'm not really trying to be overly critical because, again, I think that that's just that's kind of a minute point, to be honest. But anyway, they go through, and of course, now everybody's trying to defend themselves against these creatures, and it just kind of turns into a mess, and they lose some of the spice. And then eventually, the Pike come back, and they're like, hey, we want our spice. So, they're going through, and they're trying to get the spice. Now, Darryl says that he's popping in. So... we'll see if he actually pops in. I hope he pops in, because to be honest, like I said, I wasn't really ready to do this one on my own. So, I'm doing my best. There's a lot going on. I appreciate you guys checking this out and bearing with me. Darryl's back in, so I'm going to bring him in a second. But before I do, make sure that you smash that like button so that we can bring more stuff to you guys. And with that, now we actually have Darryl with us. What's going on, man?
Hey, man. Sorry,
Been
I'm late
trying
to
to
the
hold
party.
it down. I wasn't prepared to do this on my own.
I know,
And there's a
man.
lot of details of this thing that I'm just like, ah. But basically, I've gotten to the point to where the Bad Batch kind of are trying to get away with Sid, going through the tunnel. They have the spice. They're getting shot at by the gangster and his thugs and all that stuff, because I forgot that guy's name. And now they awaken the creatures, and they're basically trying to get back in and escape. And basically, one of the things that I was saying was that the creatures were definitely reminiscent of the Pitch Black creatures to me.
Yeah, I was thinking that the whole time. Yeah,
And again, it's
definitely.
it's one of those things that I get it. I mean, there's only a handful of designs they can do, but even the way they set it up, right, when they were first going into the tunnel, and it's like, okay, be really quiet, don't make any noise, and then of course Wrecker drops his flashlight, and then you're thinking, okay, it's gonna awaken these things. I was totally getting Pitch Black vibes from that.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, this was definitely, once again, like, it was a filler episode, of course, and it's been a while since we had a filler episode, but I thought this was still, a really good episode, first and foremost. I don't know if you've covered that already, but
well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I didn't actually point out. I did point out the fact that I like the fact that this show is doing a lot of world building, and it's doing, it either has. I said that this episode was really different. I said that basically you either get like these really heavy action type episodes, or you get these heavy character development type episodes. But all of them propelled the story forward. However, I did not really point out the fact that this could be considered more of a filler episode. I would definitely agree with that, by the way. But I think, there were certain things, though, that I thought were, like, for instance, one of the things that I brought up a little bit earlier in the show is I said that one of the things that I like, and I want to get your thoughts on this too, is that the Bad Batch aren't the typical we're going to save the day heroes. Because when Sid first said, okay, you got to help me get it back, they're kind of like, you know what? We can't. And Omega's the one that's like, well, you guys have to. She would help us and all this stuff. And it's like, they weren't about to do that because, look, they're on the run. Omega's a target. They're a target. They can't just put themselves out there for every good cause. Nor are they trying to.
But not just that, though. I mean, you also have the fact that Sid it's kind of like shady and I mean, granted, she's kind of has a love for them but it's kind of self-serving, though. You know what I mean? And so it's one of those things where when you look at Omega's attachment, I mean, of course, Omega kind of has more of an attachment to Sid because it's kind of like a motherly kind of thing, and Sid has kind of shown Omega some things on a positive side, so I could understand why Omega has that sense of loyalty. And that's really what it is. It's kind of a sense of loyalty to Sid, because it's like, look, she's letting us crash here. She's kind of kept our secrets. She's been kind of cool for the most part. I mean, yeah, she does some shady stuff, but for the most part, she's all right. We owe her, in that case. And I think that, the rest of the batch is kind of like, hey, I mean, this is the game. This is what you choose to deal with. It is what it is.
Well, I think I think you made a really good point too when you said that even though, yes, she didn't turn him in when she probably could have collected a ton of money for it.
Oh yeah.
But it was all self-serving though, because she realized that she can make even more money off of these guys. And I think that that's one of the big things, is that it wasn't like, there were some things that were definitely more, you could, I guess, translate that as out of the kindness of her own heart kind of thing. Because she did stick her neck out a little bit, and she did go above and beyond a little bit. But, you can say that all this is under the umbrella of being self-serving.
Yeah.
And they get that. Not to mention the fact that, I mean, even helping Hera and all that, they had to be talked into that too. So these guys aren't really about to, anytime they see an injustice, they're going to right the wrong kind of a thing. They kind of remind me of Qui-Gon, when basically, they're like, we got to help these people. He's like, we got to get some parts and get out of here. That's what we got to do. And it's basically one of those things that I like, that it's a choose your battles kind of a thing. So they had to be talked into this too. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about it. So from that sense, you could actually look at this episode as more of a character building type of a thing.
Development. Yeah, I would say it was more character development in this, but it's a filler episode, but it still serves a purpose. And so that's one thing I like, that it made it a little bit more tolerable to deal with than just a regular filler episode, is that it actually, like you said, it still built something. And that what it showed is kind of the relationship that Omega and the Batch had with Sid, and it's really showing, like that kind of camaraderie.
Well, the other thing that I pointed out earlier too, before you popped on, was that them bringing the Pike back.
Yeah, I thought that was cool.
I thought that was cool because they are definitely one of the more chilling, sinister villains, ruthless in the Star Wars universe, and I thought that was pretty cool. But they also, in this, I didn't actually bring this up yet, they also have a little bit more of a sense of honor, though, because their whole thing was like, look, if you guys get us a spice back, we're good.
Yeah, we're square.
That's all. They weren't going to get any kind of revenge for people taking it or anything like that. They're just like, look, you have something that belongs to us, you get it back to us, we're all good.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of like, the whole honor amongst thieves type thing, but it's also, like they get it. They're criminals too. I mean, they're a high criminal organization, so they get it. People see opportunity, they're going to take it. They're just like, well, we just have the upper hand. If you give us what we want, we'll leave you alone, because they know they're in no capacity really to deal with them. So, yeah, and for those of you who may not know, spice is the kind of Star Wars version of drugs.
Well, and it's so funny too that they actually even call it that, because now they're ripping off Dune. Even though I'd have to remember spice, I'm pretty sure that it was like a drug kind of thing. It could have been more of like a fuel or a food or something like that. I don't know. It's been a minute since I've seen Dune. Although the new trailer looks cool, so I am looking forward to seeing this new version of Dune. But, anybody that watched Dune back, because I guess if you read the books, everything makes a little bit more sense. But, I mean, the books are so thick that you're just like, ooh, I don't know. I mean, I think it's even more than Lord of the Rings or whatever. And there's a few of them. But you watch that movie, the 83 movie or whatever, you're just like, whoa, dude, I have no idea what's going on right now. And I watched a documentary on it, and there's a reason for it. But spice was one of the main things that they were doing too. And it's just one of those things that was another thing that they brought into the Star Wars universe that I'm like, okay, I don't know. Because if you think about it, they've had some really clever things, like Bacta being the stuff that heals you and stuff like that. It just seems like they could have come up with something
more original. I got you.
Yeah. I mean, even Death Stick, right? That's a little on the nose maybe, but I mean, at least it's more original than spice. It's like, okay, guys.
But I think that, getting, I guess, to the point in the junction in the story where you were talking about is, so they retrieved the spice. They're on their way to, and this is when they kind of run into, they're getting shot at, and they actually drop the spice. And now, they make it out, but then now they have a problem on their hands.
Right, but that's when the creatures were first revealed, which I pointed out that I was glad that they didn't do the cliche thing where as soon as the first time, but then I also pointed out that the writers were probably trying to build some suspense. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he drops the flashlight. It's okay. Then it doesn't do anything. So you're like, "Ooh, I wonder what's down there," and I wonder why Sid's so freaked out by them. Then when they come back,
Well,
and of course they're being shot at, it's like, "Oh, these are what, you know."
mm-hmm. Which happened? Those creatures are actually Gundarks, which is a tie-in to when Han Solo makes the line. You look strong enough to pull the ears off a
Yeah,
Gundark.
well, and
Like,
that's the thing.
I
See,
love that
and I
connection that
was
they make.
glad. I was glad you were able to pop on because that was one of the things that I was trying to save as like kind of a later reveal, but that's another one of those things that you and I had talked about forever. Is that one of the things that's cool about all these different things that are coming out with Star Wars is we're starting to actually see references to other things and deeper explanations.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, when he was like, "Oh, you look like you could pull the ears off of a
Ears off a
Gundark or
Gundark.
whatever," and of course, you wonder what that is.
Right.
Now you know. It's kind of like targeting
Yep.
Womp Rats back home, and then there was I forgot what it was, but we actually saw what a Womp Rat was.
Or a Bothan. Many Bothans died to bring us
Yep.
this. Like, what the heck are
Yep.
Bothans?
Exactly. And so it's
So
really cool that we actually finally get to see these in canon and we get to see what it looks like, and now we actually understand what that line means. Like, oh, okay, so that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
You could pull the ears off of this thing.
One thing. Yeah,
More power
strong.
to you.
Yep.
Well, especially in the sense that they're basically swarming you. Like I said, it's very a la Pitch Black. And I thought it was cool because the title of the episode, Infested, kind of gives some things away, right? You pretty much think that, okay, this is going to be that type of a creature.
Right.
But, I thought it was cool that it was actually revealed in this way.
Yeah, so let's see. So now the Bad Batch kind of and Sid kind of make it out of the little cavern or whatnot, and so now they kind of come face to face with the Pikes, and they pretty much figure like, okay, well, the Pikes have taken Roland Durand out already, but they're still there.
That was his name.
And
I do not remember his name to save my life. It's hilarious.
Oh. So
like the gangster guy that took over
little hornhead, yeah,
right.
But but yeah, so, and it's funny because he's the same species that was in was it the Cantina?
Well, he was definitely, yeah. He's actually, that species has popped up a few times.
Yeah, in the original trilogy. But I remember from the original trilogy because I remember it looked like Satan and all this. Like, the heck is that? But that's basically his species. And so I thought that was cool too. As a nice little added continuity thing. But so now they have Roland Durand, and he's kind of like, these are the guys who kind of stole your stuff. They kind of make this bargain. So then now they kind of have to go back and go get the spice. So now it's Wrecker and Sid have to go back and retrieve it. Well, she keeps switching his name from Muscles to big guy and everything like that. But it's bandana and goggles and
yeah.
like
I love Sid's little nicknames for him. Yeah. I think they're hilarious.
Yeah, they crack me up.
It's just so dismissive. It's like, yeah, all right, goggles. We just got to do,
Right. So, they go back to the cave, and now of course the swarm has kind of gone back down into the depths, and then so now Wrecker and Sid are kind of down there trying to find the spice, and as they're finding, they're hoisting it back up to the ship.
Well, before we finish that though, it reminds me of a really good point. This is something I thought of when I was watching this. I thought it was really cool that Sid insisted on going down there, right? Because they had to leave Omega back as sort of like collateral in order to get it. And Sid was kind of like, you know what? I got her into this mess. I feel really bad. Now I'm going to lead. It's going to be like me and Wrecker going down to get the spice. And to me,
valid point.
That actually shows a little bit of either it's revealing a little bit more about Sid's actual personality, or it's demonstrating growth in her personality where she's starting to feel a little bit warm and fuzzy toward these
Attached.
guys. And yeah, exactly. So I thought
Yeah,
that
that's a
was
valid, a
something,
good point.
yeah, that was something that was really surprising to me. It wasn't like she was just going on the mission. She's like, no, man, I'm going down there. I'm going to be the one to, get this
Yeah, I'm gonna
stuff.
make
And
sure.
yep.
Yeah, she's putting herself on the line, and that's something that always kind of shows like great leadership is like when you're willing to put yourself out there and say, look, I'm gonna you know make sure this gets done.
Mm-hmm.
So as you're retrieving this stuff up, Tech, or Goggles in her, is he's actually on the ship. He's tinkering. He's coming up with a device that he kind of realizes, like, all right, because they noticed on the first run that those creatures do not like sunlight.
Yeah, or any kind of light, because that was one of the
Or
things
any
that they were able to do is start shining their flashlights and doing all that
flashlights
stuff and
freaking them out.
freaking
Right.
them out and disorienting them. And
So Tech, of course, noticing that, he's kind of like, all right, I got something for you. So he's kind of creating this little device. So anywho, of course, our heroes are acquiring the last bit of spice, and they're pretty much done. And then, of course, that's when the swarm decides to, attack once again. And, now this time, Sid and Wrecker are pretty much like on their way up when they get, ambushed by the whole swarm again. And so as they're trying to leave out of the place, Tech unleashes like this, like, ultralight bomb, pretty much.
yeah, that bomb,
completely
that
just-
thing was so cool. That it was
like
basically
it's
like a
giant
flash grenade, but
flash grenade. Yeah,
but on steroids or something.
it kind of reminded me of Blade. I remember Blade used to have those little ultraviolet like lights.
Well,
that would
even
freak out, and
it's funny because years ago, and it's kind of like my favorite thing, and people who are older remember Johnny Sacco and his flying robot.
oh wow,
Yeah, well, I know.
Like you took it there, huh?
I did. But I mean, there's a couple of things from that series, though. And this is what it reminds me of. One of the creepiest episodes of that series, and anybody older than probably like 40 will probably remember this. And that was the second from last episode. There was like this whole vampire thing, right? And there was this weird vampire that lived in this house, and it pretty much had all of its little vampire girl minions or whatever that, would basically haunt everybody. And so Johnny Sacco, of course, and his other guys are going in there, and they get attacked by this vampire. Well, what ends up happening is they decide to call the giant robot out. And of course, as a kid, you're thinking, yeah, man, because there's no way this thing's going to be able to defeat that. Well, all of a sudden, the vampire makes itself as big as a robot. And one of the reasons why it sticks out in my mind, and this is where it's actually tying into this episode, is the first thing that Johnny tells it to do is like shoot these flaming crosses at it, which were kind of cool because these were powers that the robot didn't even previously have up until this point. But then, I don't know, he said something like, robot use the sun or the star or something, and then the robot kind of spreads his arms and just becomes this like crazy bright light or something, and naturally it disorients him, and then he's able to beat him. And that was kind of the vibe or the effect that this little light bomb thing had on these creatures. I thought it was kind of the same thing, and it was really cool because it was insanely bright. And it was a really good it was a good idea. But what surprised me about this, though, and I guess maybe, see, I was thinking that it was really surprising to me that they just didn't have these kind of weapons. But maybe they do, and it's just like they didn't have it. So it would almost be like if they had to fashion a thermal detonator because they had the parts, but they didn't actually have any thermal detonators. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's the cool thing about having Tech around is that, he can cobble together stuff like, oh, okay, I got this. This should do it. And, they got all types of different munitions and pieces kind of just like laying about for him to kind of do his thing.
And that's it. One of the things I love about this show, it kind of brings me to another thing that I think is really, really well done about this show, and that is you don't really get the sense that any one of the Bad Batch is more important than the others. You know, you don't get what I call the Michael Jordan syndrome.
Right.
Where it's kind of like, well, you can have anybody. As long as you got him, you know, it really doesn't matter who else is there kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, at first you thought, well, because it's like they almost all take turns because each one of their abilities actually helps out in different situations. So there's times where Wrecker's the guy. There's times where Hunter's the guy. And Tech.
Yeah.
I mean, Tech is actually, without that guy, I would argue that he's almost more important than a lot of the other ones. Because if you think about everything that he's gotten them out of, the whole inhibitor chip, you know.
Well, I mean, I just think that, you know, he's probably next to Hunter, he's probably the most versatile.
Yeah.
You know, Echo is cool because he gets you into places like he's like a droid, but not a droid. You know what I mean?
Right.
He's kind of like a droid that can fight. You know, he's kind of like almost like a Chopper and K2SO in a human form, though.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then, of course, Wrecker just being like just a blunt force where, you know, but then again, like I said, you know, there's times where he's just the fact that he's able to open doors with his bare hands or just throw stuff at people that's insanely heavy and he can wipe out like 12 people like with one shot. I mean,
each
like,
one
you know,
of them, each one of those guys has been able to shine at some point, and you realize you really need all of them in order to make up this team, and that's one of the reasons why that team is unstoppable.
Definitely.
Because what I really wanted to see was, you know, when the Pikes started getting a little bit, you know, kind of full aggressive of themselves a little bit. I'm sitting there thinking, like, you know, you guys really don't know who you're talking to.
Yeah, like, all you gotta do unleash Wrecker, dude. That guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, they're all like, oh, you don't know who you're, and I'm sitting there thinking, no, you don't know who you're dealing. I mean, these aren't like normal. I mean, even if they were normal
guys take out a whole battalion of clone. Yeah, they'll take out a whole battalion of people, and it's just the four of them.
Yep. Yep. I mean, it's kind of like,
exactly.
It almost makes me want to see them, you know, because the Pikes sometimes, with good reason, are formidable guys, but they kind of need their butts handed to them, I think. And the Bad Batch are the guys to do it.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Do you think we've seen the last of them?
The Pikes?
Yeah.
Nah. Well, no, I don't think so. I think they'll probably cross paths maybe in like another season or so.
Yeah, I hope so. I was thinking in terms of, on one hand, you could say, well, maybe those guys are just being used because they're a familiar villain, and it would be kind of cool to cross paths with them, and then, you know, they'll move on to something else. But I actually agree. I think that, first of all, the Pike is a particular criminal organization that would be cool to feature. I like to see them in live action, personally.
Yeah.
But I think that they'll pop up in other seasons. I think they're done for this season, but I think they will pop up in other ones.
Well, especially, you know, with Omega, because like, if Omega stays out of, you know, the Empire's clutches, remember, they're a criminal organization. Once they find out who Omega is, and they're like, oh, we just had this person, we could make all this money.
That's a good point.
You see what I'm saying? Like, I can see them totally coming back for her.
I do. I think that could definitely be
a nice
something that would be
I can see that 3 or 4 episodes, you know.
Well, at some point, I just think that they have to do something to where they concentrate a little bit more on everybody looking for Omega. I kind of like the way they're doing it now, in the sense of, it's not like everything's so one-sided. Like in The Mandalorian, for instance, you get things that are extremely one-sided, right? It's kind of like you got the Empire is looking for Grogu. They're hiring other people. And that's really the only... It's like this one singular thing that you're seeing in this whole galaxy. What I like is, once again, it goes back to the world-building thing, to where you're actually seeing other things are happening. It's not just everybody is looking for Omega and the Bad Batch are wanted. You're seeing the effects of what else is happening post Clone Wars, and you're also seeing things like what's happening on Lothal and
Ryloth
other
and all
and
that.
Ryloth and different other planets. Like where else have they gone? What was that other planet they just spent a bunch of time on that actually came from?
Bracken?
Yeah, that's it. Bracken.
Yep.
So, I mean, you get to
Yep.
see a lot of these multifaceted things. It's not just this one singular plot line and we're carrying that through the season. You have all these other things that are weaved into it too. And I think that that's another thing that really makes this show shine even above some of the other ones that we've seen.
Oh yeah, definitely. What did you think about Omega's relationship with Roland? Because she kind of tries to kind of appeal to his sense of decency and things like that.
Well, I think again, this shows how well developed the writing of the show is. And I think a lot of that is because Filoni's had the Clone Wars and Rebels under his belt now. He's done some work on The Mandalorian. He's becoming more seasoned as a writer and as a storyteller. And what I think is really cool is, once again, Roland's not a one-dimensional villain. In fact, you see, he's really not terrible. He's caught in his situation. Right.
Yeah, he's kind of like, my mom was a criminal. That's kind of what I was raised to be. I mean,
and he's just trying to impress the people that are influential in his life. And I think that, he's starting to realize, and you see a little bit of vulnerability in him toward the end that Omega definitely picks up on. And it's nice that she can kind of bring out a little bit some of that softness, that he actually has. And it changed the whole nature of the character. I mean, you went from basically, as you were supposed to, hate this guy, and now you see him in a little bit of a different light, and you're like, oh, well, now I kind of don't want him to die. It's like, man, right. I actually want this guy to succeed, and it's just funny how Filoni's gotten to the point to where he could take these characters and he could play with your emotions like that. But yeah, that was a really big, especially after he got his little horn chopped off and everything, and you're just like,
yeah,
man, I mean, it really, it just kind of, I don't know, it kind of bothered me, and it really tugged at my heartstrings a little.
Yeah, you definitely feel bad for him now. It's like, now he's got to kind of go back to his people, with only like, now he's like a unicorn, and, people are like, well, what happened to you? And, he's got to explain, and so he's got to deal with the guilt and the shame of that. But then
right, it's like, yeah,
time,
easy there, one horn.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, and that's it. It's one of those things that, again, in the beginning of the episode, you would have been happy if they just all would have unleashed a bunch of laser fire on the guy and just cut him down. Uh-oh. You know who's joined us? Jason. Well, actually, that's my earlier thing. Yeah, Jason's joined us. But for some odd reason, while this overlay was working before, it's not now. But yeah, Jason says hello there. So hey, even though we're getting close to the end. But you know what? We're starting at a way different time, right? Usually we do these things at like 8 p.m. But again, as I mentioned earlier, I have all this like dad in the hospital thing going on and life stuff going on. Of course, you had a bunch of technical issues, and yeah, it was just bad. But yeah, that's one of the things that I think was really cool about the whole thing. And I'm really glad that they're exploring these things and they're not just doing the obvious.
Yeah. I think it's really cool, and I think, like you said, he's becoming more of a seasoned writer. He's really expanding a lot of different of avenues and playing, like you said, playing with the emotions with these characters, is really cool. So the next episode is actually called War Mantle.
Oh, is it?
So yeah. Next episode is called War Mantle.
That'll be cool.
So that sounds That sounds intense. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that.
And I think that's where we get back to Crosshair. I think that's where
I hope so.
I think we're going to round out this season with some major stuff with Crosshair.
Yeah, I think that they do need to definitely get back to that. Because we sort of, I don't know, it just like we haven't really gotten. That's the one thing I would say in this series so far that even though they've, don't get me wrong, they've done a lot of really cool things with it, but it's just we haven't seen too much of it. I don't think that they've actually delved into the Crosshair storyline as deeply as we need to. Jason says, I felt like this episode was the most filler of all episodes, which we actually did say. We agreed. He said he was pretty disappointed. I hope they do a 3-episode finale. Again, I wasn't disappointed. Here's some really quick key things that we covered. Number one, it basically was showing how the Bad Batch weren't just going to save the day in every episode like all the other hero-based animated series would do. Sid needed help, and the Bad Batch was all like, you know what? Yeah. So Omega's wanted, we're wanted, we can't get involved. Same thing with the whole Hera situation. They had to be talked into that too. So I really like the fact that that was happening. And of course, it furthers Omega's thing like, hey, Sid would do that for us. Another big thing that this episode did was it showed some growth in Sid. Sid, once Omega was basically used as collateral, Sid was kind of like, no, you know what? I'm going to take the lead on this mission. I got her into this. I got to get her out of this. Serious growth for Sid, who up until this point has only really been self-serving. It's not that she hasn't really cared about anything else, but she's number one. And this time she's putting herself on the line and in jeopardy, physical jeopardy, in order to help somebody else. Jason goes on to say, yeah, but you can accomplish all those story beats in an episode that's more relevant. Yeah, you could. But who's to say it's not relevant? We don't know how many seasons this is going to go. This is reintroduced the Pike into things. You have more character development with the Bad Batch and all this stuff. You can't just look at, especially in a season 1 situation, you can't look at every single episode that might be seemingly filler. Not to mention the fact, if you basically look at everybody's lives, our entire lives can be considered filler a lot of times. Think of all the events that happen in your life versus a normal day. One of the criticisms I always had in a lot of TV shows is the fact that it seems like something earth-shattering happens in every single episode. And you're like, okay, come on. And if you think about it, this is kind of a big deal. I mean, even though it's a filler episode to us, and by that, and again, we don't disagree that it was. Because it's not necessarily furthering the main story arc. But, and Jason says that's a fair point, it's pretty difficult to critique things without seeing the whole story. But beyond that, you also have to look at, one of the things that I pointed out earlier too, was the fact that you either have things that are heavier on the action, or maybe more plot-driven, but then you also have some stuff that's more character development-oriented. And I think that that's where this story falls. It's showing that the Bad Batch is not going to be the hero in every story. They're kind of like, you know what? We got to choose our battles. We can't just be putting ourselves on the line for every noble deed, right? Every good mission. Sometimes people are just going to have to fend for themselves. Kind of like how Qui-Gon wasn't really in a hurry to free Anakin. It was only after he realized, well, you know what, this kid could be the chosen one. Maybe I better... But he was basically telling Obi-Wan, hey, look, we're not here to save slaves. It's kind of their problem.
Exactly.
And Jason says, yes, that's why they don't just film ordinary people's lives without editing scenes to keep the pacing interesting. Exactly. But the point is that just like in music and just like in any television show, if you look, there are dynamics. You can't have everything always at the top. You have to have
Yeah.
dynamics. You have to have the lower, subtler things, and then you bring it back up again. You can't just have, action, heavy plot point, action, heavy plot point. Now, I would agree with you if this were like an 8-episode series
Yeah.
in a single season. See, The Mandalorian I'm a little bit more critical of because you only have like 8 to 10 episodes in a season. And now I don't think that
And
Obi-Wan...
those episodes aren't that long either.
Exactly. Right.
That's the other thing too. Like you only have like first season, you were only getting like 20 minutes sometimes, or 30, maybe 30 minutes tops. And you're like, okay, how are we going to get, all this stuff in here?
Well, that's actually been one of my problems with it. And again, I realize it's multiple seasons, so, who knows? If they go like 12 seasons, it won't be so bad. But one of the biggest issues is they start talking about all the stuff they want to cram into it. You're like, whoa. Jason says maybe it should have been an 8-episode series. If you need filler episodes, you should make it shorter. But again, you don't know this is filler because it's character development. See, if something had just been nonstop action, everybody would complain that the characters are one-dimensional.
Well, not only that, but like you said, it still goes back to the whole dynamics. It's like a well-made song. You kind of just, it has to kind of build, and you have to have that. You kind of have to have that. Any good series is like that. Even with Game of Thrones, as great as Game of Thrones was, you still had some kind of filler episodes on Game of Thrones because you kind of have to build and kind of let things kind of simmer a little bit, and to take you back up again. Now, shows like even one of our favorite shows, of all time, 24. That's a little bit different because this is taking place theoretically in one day. So there's this great big catastrophe that's happening that you have to solve by the end of the day. So yeah, I get that. And you kind of have to have higher.
And that show is a perfect example too, because that's where filler episodes stick out like a sore thumb. When you've got 3 episodes where Kim Bauer's running in the woods,
right,
which has like 0 to do with the plot, then I have a problem.
Story, right.
Jason says, filler does not mean no action. It means no plot development. It means no progress. It means it is stagnant, which makes it less interesting. Again, with this episode, number 1, we agreed it was filler. But number 2, character development is plot driven. It may not be necessarily the, I guess what you would call, but you are deepening the characters. You are moving the plot forward. And that's
because
the problem.
Because in this one, you have to think about it like, okay, like I mentioned before, I don't know if Jason, you caught this, but when they brought the Pikes into the situation, that changes the game a lot, honestly, because one, they are a organization and an entity that has come from from Clone Wars, and we all know how Dooku and how powerful the Pikes or crime organization is. Omega is wanted, and so are the Bad Batch. So I'm sure that once the Pikes realize who they probably had in their captivity at one point, once they kind of realize, oh, the new empire is looking for them and there's this bounty out for them and we could really get rich off of this. Yeah, the Pikes are probably coming back, but they kind of have to set that up in this episode. At the same time, along with Roland, I forgot his last name now, Roland Duran. All right. So at this particular moment, he started off as the enemy of this particular story. Towards the end, you see that he softened his emotions and his mind to a lot of things due to Omega. That may come about because it may become a situation where now in another future episode, the Pikes may be after them, after the Bad Batch now, and they may need to go to Roland Duran for help. Once again, it circles back, but you have to establish that. Now, I'm not saying that's what it is, but to me, I could see that happening. And so to me, once again, it's not necessarily it's filler, but not filler.
Yeah, it's filler, but it's not. I guess there's a difference for me in filler that is just useless And then filler, which is more of a kind of a break in the action where it doesn't necessarily affect the storyline. Now, where I would agree, and this is probably why I call it filler, if you took this episode out, at least for what we know right now, if you took it out, and this is probably what Jason's talking about, say you remove this episode and you go from like 12 to 14, although I don't know, maybe we'll think differently when we see the next episode. But right now, with what we know, if you remove this episode from the equation, it wouldn't affect the main storyline.
True.
However, with what you're talking about, and this is something that I was talking about, you know, and Jason was saying, well, what did we learn about the Pikes? It's world building if you learn something new. Not necessarily. It's world building in the sense of, and this goes into your point, that you are introducing a known character into a new situation. World building can be that too. And that's something that I think that you might be onto something, and you're right. That might not be what happens at all. You know? But the good news is that I'm a little bit more, I guess, forgiving for this one than I was on the Mandalorian Season 2 episode with the whole spider thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I brought this up before too, with that episode, one of the reasons why it irritated me, and you could say, because really that episode really tied into the next episode or two. So it wasn't really filler if you take it in context with the next two episodes. But what I hated was they had this amazing season premiere with Cobb Vanth, and, you know, you're kind of teasing Boba Fett again, and you're doing all this. And now the next episode, you're giving me, we're running away from a spider with Frog Lady. Mm-hmm. Maybe not the best follow-up. That might have been an episode that would have been better later on.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like the Bad Batch has done well, because throughout this whole season, there haven't been many filler episodes. I think maybe can count two, this being the second one. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, everything is kind of grown, and you kind of it progressed the story. And so for this to come at this juncture, I think is appropriate, because now, like you said, they got 3 episodes left. Those are probably going to be high impact. You know, the next one is called War Mantle. That just sounds intense.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, you know, I don't think anything called War Mantle is going to be filler, but
yeah, exactly. And especially when, you know, Crosshair has gotten the permission to, you know, hunt them down. So I don't see it, you know, slowing down at any point. But yeah, I just think that this was a cool episode. It didn't do too much. It didn't do too little. It was just it was cool, you know, and I think it served its purpose, and I'm ready for War Mantle now.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree. I feel the same way. It was cool. You know, it screamed filler to me right from the get-go.
Oh yeah.
And
but I knew one had to be coming, though.
Yeah, you knew that it had to be. I mean,
it had to come.
Pretty much every series generally has one
spot for it. So I mean,
yeah, and I mean it was a good episode. Mm-hmm. But I think part of the problem is, and I think this is what Jason's talking about, and this is usually what happens to me with a lot of different plots, particularly the Clone Wars. I mean, you want to talk about filler episodes. The Clone Wars had filler story arcs. That stupid one with the droids going across and trying to find their way home, and they're in this desert. I mean, come on. I mean, you know, Jason says that, you know, this felt filler because I don't see how it connects to the plot. That episode with the droids going across, that really didn't connect to anything. This, at least, you get a little bit of character development. You get a little bit of change, and you're introducing somebody. And again, as a disconnected episode, it really doesn't seemingly have anything to do with the plot. I'd agree with that. If, you know, anybody wants to call it filler, I mean, I called it filler right at the beginning of the show.
Definitely.
And you did too when you hopped on. Mm-hmm. In fact, I alluded to it, but you came on. First thing that you said when you hopped on this thing, the very first things out of your mouth wasn't even like, "Hey man, you know, sorry I was late." Nope. It's like, "Well, this episode was filler. What else did you know?" I mean, right out of the gate. And Jason even says Dave Filoni has too many filler episodes. I wouldn't dispute that. I would not dispute that comment. But I think that a lot of it, again, I think the filler episodes are minimized in this series. And I think that even within the filler episodes, you do have some things that are redeemable, whether it's world building, whether it's character development, whether it's just a good, cool thing, because again, it's another thing that shows that the Bad Batch aren't necessarily going to be the heroes of the day, as it were. So I think that that's a good thing.
Well, like I said, filler episodes, I mean, I think they're okay as long as they're done right. And I think that's the biggest thing for me.
Man, we should almost do a show like that.
About filler?
About filler episodes.
But hey, we might one day. But I kind of look at it like a sandwich, right? The meat of the matter, of course, is the plot. But the filler would be like, okay, like, do you need lettuce, tomato, and all that stuff, cheese? Not necessarily, but it adds to it. It kind of adds flavor.
I wouldn't get carried away.
Flavor to it.
Yeah.
It adds that flavor to it. It adds different textures to it. Some people like crunch. Some people like, different things. And so with that filler, a lot of times it kind of accents a lot of different things. And that's basically what it does. And especially in this one, it accented the story, because what you're getting out of this, it may be, and it's like you said, it's the subtleties. It's okay, we're seeing the Bad Batch change. If you think about it, from the day we saw them, they just been gung-ho war heroes, and they're just, but we're seeing progressively how their lives are changing. Okay, they're seeing that the republic that they once fought so valiantly for has changed. We're seeing that, like, okay, they're slaughtering Jedi, including kids. One of their own defected and left them. They found out they had like chips implanted in their head. Now they got attached to this little girl who wants to, be like them. And then now they're kind of softening. And then now they're meeting, other people like Rex, who's kind of showing like, well, I have a different path. Things are changing. So we're progressively seeing the change of the Bad Batch, sometimes in great speeds and then other times very slowly. This is just one of those slower points where you're seeing it happen, like, okay, we don't want to get involved. Like you've been saying, like, we don't need to be in every fight. But at this point, they still have loyal hearts. They still have that loyalty that's still embedded in them, whether it was to the Republic or whether it's to Omega or now their newfound friends or people that they've kind of come in contact with. They still have that sense of loyalty. And so once again, it still builds upon them, because remember, the story is the Bad Batch. That's the title of the show, the Bad Batch. So we're seeing their adventures and how they're all at some point progressing and changing.
Well, yeah, and I'll go on to say that I'm actually surprised by the depth of this show. It's been no secret.
When you think about it,
it has been no secret that I was not excited about this show at all when it was first announced. In fact, I was a little disappointed. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, great. Do I really want to, deal with because I honestly thought that we were just going to get another Adventure of the Week type of show. Let me see if, cool. I got these working again. And Jason's like, do the filler episode where you have no other topics, but you need to do a stream. So, in other words, do a filler episode on filler episodes.
I see what he's doing here.
Yeah. So his latest comment is, I would argue that filler is like eating plain rice with your sandwich. Sure, it's got setting and maybe some minor character development, but it's not really that interesting.
Unless you're, never mind.
Don't say it. Don't go there. Let's just say that rice is the staple of some people's diets. And let it go at that. No need to be controversial on the show.
All right. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah.
Oh,
well, I mean, you know what? So fortunately, I know it was right there. It was right there. Man. You almost made it to the end
All right. I'm back.
That's good. That's good. See, I needed that. See, this is cool, Jason. Why didn't you show up earlier in the show? Of course, maybe it's better that he didn't. We'd end up getting in more trouble.
Right.
But hey, you know what? I mean, with that, this is probably a good time to wrap it up. Not the rice, mind you. But
No.
I know I had to go there. But wait, I gotta put it in there. So he says, I like rice too, but I think it's a good metaphor for most people. But you know what though? I mean, not to get off on a tangent again, but it's white rice that actually needs something. And honestly, if I may torture this metaphor even more than it has been already, if you want to go with the rice thing, see, white rice being plain actually needs something to flavor it. And I think that maybe that's what a lot of people, not just Jason, not just even us in a lot of ways, but a lot of people, when they talk about filler episodes, I think that that's what it is. It's like white rice with nothing else, right? Whereas it's like, yeah, you have the foundation, you have it there, but it's bland. Whereas that's why most people like brown rice or fried rice or anything like that. But, and again, like I said, overall, I think it was a good episode. Was it a necessary episode? Probably not. Did it give us more character development and some key things like Sid changing her attitude? Sure. But did it do it in the framework of a necessary element to the plot? No. But again, I liked it. I know you liked it. I think Jason liked it, just thought it was filler. But the question is, what about everybody else? I mean, because we went on so late tonight, there wasn't a whole lot of people on the live stream, but you guys watching on the playback, let us know in the comments section. Let us know. Was it filler? Or was it something that you thought was vital? What did you all think? So I think with that, we're going to close it out this Friday. What should we talk about this Friday? We could do the High Republic issue number 6 review.
We could.
We probably should. So unless, like last week with the whole Thrawn and Ezra thing, unless something crazy pops up, that's what we'll do. We'll review the High Republic issue number 6. So until Friday, remember, join us at 8 o'clock. Once again, hit that like button. If you guys like what you see here and you want to join in some lively, good discussion that's, free of toxicity and all that other stuff, join us every Friday night and every Monday night at 8 o'clock Eastern. We'd love to actually talk to you guys. Once again, want to thank everybody for being with us. Thanks, Jason. It's good that usually it's the comments that we get to talk to him. Very rarely is he able to make it onto the live stream. So it was good to have you. It was good to have that live discussion going. So until Friday, guys, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Darryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.